extraordinary few days, politically speaking. Joe Biden's recent debate performance was widely regarded as disastrous, including by Democrat hardliners. There are 4 months until the 5th of November elections in the US. We'll discuss what the debate means and what happens now. Meanwhile, Trump has just been granted immunity for official acts taken while in the White House, with the case being sent back to the lower court to determine which acts alleged in the indictment are official. France are midway between the first and second round of their snap election, with Marine Le Pen's RN receiving 33.2% of the vote, the left wing New Popular Front on 28%, and Macron on 22.4%. The UK general election is being held this week on US Independence Day. And meanwhile, Pride Month has ended. And this year it was a lot more muted than in previous years, with far fewer brands participating in the Rainbow Carnival, and a mere 32,000 people marched yesterday in London, down from more than 1 million just 2 years ago. I'm your host, Nina Power, and I'm joined today by Sohrab Ahmari and Matthew Schmitz. So, your expert opinion on the debate, guys, and what happens next.
A lot has been said since the debate. A lot of Americans, I watch it live and only slowly kind of realize that something was very off and something significant was happening. It didn't help that I had to be in and out of the room and was, trying to wash dishes. But what was maybe more remarkable than the debate itself was the chorus of pundits saying that Biden needed to drop out. The most authoritative media institution in the United States is the New York Times, and many of its columnists, its editorial board called for Biden to drop out. There was a report. I can't remember if I read this report in the New York Times or in another paper, possibly the Wall Street Journal, about how Democratic donors were circulating the New York Times op ed, which was published during a campaign event at which Biden or one of his top surrogates, maybe Dr. Jill Biden or someone else, was speaking. It's just an immensely influential publication. You've seen some kind of interesting discussions among conservatives, I'd say, who have long spoken as though there is an absolute lockstep alignment between the Democratic Party, as it is led by Joe Biden, and a media outlet like the New York Times. And there are a lot of reasons to think that there is alignment between those two institutions to this day. But some important differences can also emerge as has happened here. I guess the question I am asking myself is this: will any of it work? Will Biden drop out? I think he is fully capable of just defying them if he wants to do so. Maybe he won't win. Maybe some donations will be held back. But I can't help but think of another candidate who, under very different circumstances, defied, uh, you know, big, seemingly authoritative media outlets, who ran against the wishes of many of his party's top donors, and that, of course, is Donald Trump. Trump and Biden resemble each other in a lot of ways. They have resentments. They feel themselves to be outsiders. Uh, Biden is not an Ivy League man or the kind of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford man like a lot of leading Democratic politicians are. He has a bit of a chip on his shoulder because of that. He feels he's been underestimated and dismissed at various times. He was Barack Obama's vice president, but didn't run for president after that, instead ceding ground for Hillary Clinton, a Yale law grad. And, uh, maybe Biden will, who craves the approval of these institutions but also has some resentment toward them, will justify them. Bill Buckley famously said that he'd rather be ruled by the first 200 people in the Boston phone book than by the faculty of Harvard College. So, taking him seriously on that and looking at it as, and just rescinding from all other, or sorry, and abstracting from all other considerations, which group of people more closely resembles the first 200 names in the Boston telephone book. Joe Biden's group of somewhat random kind of cronies from Delaware, some Catholics and Jewish guys, and then his family, led up by Dr. Jill Biden, and of course, Hunter Biden, Sohrab's old friend, or the New York Times. Which one is more sociologically representative and less elite? By the Buckley test, it looks like the Biden crime family is the more representative body. So maybe there's some kind of populist case for sticking with a man who seems manifestly unqualified for the job.
Perhaps, I mean, bear in mind that Trump is also now a felon. He also is therefore identifiable with many average Americans. Um, so perhaps it's a kind of a beautiful race to the bottom here. Sarah,
Yeah, I guess I have to recount my um, experience of watching the thing. I was extremely tired because I'd been in a conference in Washington that day, and I was like, I'm not going to watch it. I went to like a restaurant nearby and stuffed my face with like steak and was like, I'm going to go to bed. But you know what? I'll just have it in the background and I'll fall asleep to it. And needless to say, I did not fall asleep at all to it. It kept me riveted because it was the first kind of capital E political event we've had in some time since, basically, well, I would say maybe since the events of January 6th, like a thing that keeps you specifically a political capital E event. And what kicked it off for me, of course, was the answer on, I don't know what the topic was because poor Joe Biden was just spewing this gibberish where he says, at the end of his kind of nonsensical rant, he says something like, um, you know, pause, long pause. If long pause, we finally beat Medicare. And of course, Trump, clearly being much more mentally acute, immediately picked up on that and he said, "Oh, yet they definitely have beat up on Medicare by importing so many illegal immigrants." And from then on, I mean, it just got worse and worse. And um, I think there was one of the attempts of people who wanted to try to cope their way through this is to say, "Oh my gosh, they're both so awful," and like that's not true. One was clearly, as I put it on Twitter, it's floating in the shadowy liminal realm between life and death, or like entered into kind of semi-senescence, and the other was actually sharp. He was the Trump we always know. I mean, his mind kind of goes faster than his lips can keep up, and he has sort of fragments of ideas that he wants to get them all in. But it's rapid, it's alert, it's energetic, it's forceful, and that comeback that I mentioned, where he says, "Yeah, they definitely did beat Medicare," tells you how bad. How real the difference was. And so this cope of saying on the part of some Democrats, "Oh man, is this the best we can do? Is these two?" I'm like, well, there's a difference. I can't uh, but mention another case, a similar case where, again, at the end of this long rant of this sort of stream of unconsciousness, but Trump said, "I had no idea what he just said." I don't think he knows what he just said. It was just such a,
That was a great line, just unforgettable.
and he said it in this kind of, almost, it came off as humane or in a pitying way, and it was all the more devastating for that. I don't know what he just said. I don't think he knows what he said. I mean, oh, devastating.
Yeah, to be pitied by Trump when you're his rival for the presidency, not good. Not good.
So, yeah, I mean, where do they go from here? I guess is the question on the minds of ev- lots of Americans sitting around restaurant tables, bar stools, whatever. I have some gut instincts. I don't know. I think I've heard people who are kind of more informed about election law than I am, that in about half the states the ballots are already printed, or basically that it's set, and so the kind of there's a whole legal rigmarole they will have to go through, the Democrats, if they do want to replace him. Whom do they replace him with, even if they succeed at that? In some ways, the obvious choice, of course, the vice president, Kamala Harris. Um, and she has the advantage of, if she goes to the top of the ticket, the campaign war chest that they've built up, all these donations, they would get to retain. But if neither Biden or Kamala is on the is leading the campaign, then they actually have to return the funds they've raised. Now, theoretically, they could re-raise them, but it's an issue. Now, if they do keep Kamala, she's not exactly a charismatic politician. I mean, over the past couple of days on Twitter, someone put together all the instances in which she uses this hackneyed sort of vapid line where she says, "What can be unburdened by what has been." And she says it over and over. And sometimes with different intonations, she'll be like, "What can be unencumbered by what has been?
She just needs to
What
push
can
it
be."
farther. Like, have you ever heard Trump read The Snake? If not, you've never had the privilege and joy of watching the entirety of one of his rallies. It's this poem, uh, which I don't think has been widely anthologized. Doesn't appear in any Oxford English verse collections, about this woman who finds a snake that is uh, so sick and cold, and she brings it in and warms it by the fire, and then the snake bites her. And it's, this 50-line poem that's a parable of the risks of accepting all these migrants. So she just needs to push the weirdness farther, the kind of repetitive. She needs her own The Snake.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what Matthew's getting at there is that she's a terrible politician. She's like the most unpopular figure in the Democratic Party right now. I guess they have Gavin Newsom. We've talked about him. He has like the Justin Trudeau appeal to the suburban moms because he's handsome. He's actually very articulate. And one thing I do like about Gavin is he likes to engage non-friendly media. Like, he'll go on Fox News, he'll go on conservative podcasts. That's rare these days for Democratic politicians. So anyway, these are the options. But I also just think quite aside from the point that Matthew made, which I think is very well taken, like, Biden won his second primary fair and square. He's won his delegates fair and square. So, he'd have a case to make that he's been a comeback kid. He's always been written off, dismissed, underestimated, and he always comes back. So quite aside from all that, though, I think if you replace someone, it's just telegraphs crisis. It telegraphs that things are bad in the Democratic Party, and I don't know. I'm very obviously we have lots of writers for Compact who are left of center, progressives of various shades, who are enraged about Biden. They were enraged about him, long before this, but now especially. And I think they make a good argument, but I think I'm with Matthew there's this sense of like, he he won it fair and square. He's still perhaps the most appealing figure in the Democratic Party in terms of his common touch. That I actually think that Republicans underestimate that about him. So I don't know if it's so easy when people keep saying boot him off, boot him off. Like, it's all sorts of complications, legal complications, political complications, institutional ones.
Right. Gretchen Whitmer is very appealing on paper. So is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Presumably, they would help the Democrats win their states. We'd need to see, you know. But I would just say that Republicans have a long history of believing that reasonably successful governors are going to have juice as national candidates, and then they don't. Um, Scott Walker is not really a name to conjure with today, but at one point, the entire conservative media complex was bought in on him as a savior of the party and future president. Another kind of Rust Belt governor. So, that there again kind of raises the question: would any of these people be better than Biden? I mean, I mean, surely having someone who's mentally competent, uh, that would be reassuring to me as an American. And then I do have some worries about Biden in that respect. Uh, but I'm not sure it's as easy a call for the Democrats as a lot of their pundits are saying. Um, you've also, I guess, you've seen Ezra Klein especially argue that this is an occasion to reinvigorate the structure of the Democratic Party. He talks about how the social science literature about how the parties have been hollowed out as organizations capable of acting independently and for their own interests. And he sees this as a moment to reinvigorate the party. I'm not sure that's really what would happen even if Biden were ousted, because the party itself wouldn't be exerting agency. I think it would be more the Biden camp bowing to the wishes of uh, you know donors who are influenced by very important organs of opinion like the New York Times. I'm just not sure that there's much of a Democratic party there, a thick party structure that is capable of uh, acting for its own reasons, irrespective of what anyone else is saying. I think this is more of a Democratic media versus Biden political machine contest, with donors maybe being able to tip it one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, from the outside, it does seem like the division is between the left media pundits, or the Democratic pundits, and the party itself, with all of this complexity of the machinery and the conference and the VP and the 25th Amendment. Like, it's not actually going to be very easy. And it seems like, well, if he can just make it through to November, no one else is remotely as popular. Certainly, Kamala Harris does not seem to have the public support, even if she has apparently some quite rabid fans. But
I
they're
mean,
not going to.
there's just sorry to interrupt you, but there's
No.
just also such an echo of all these things. Well, we're going to we'll have a battle on the floor of the convention,
Mhm.
or we'll invoke the 25th Amendment. Every one of these things is a sort of a callback to a previous season of this American political show where these things were, talked about for Trump. You had, you know,
Mhm.
Republican senators, throwing their credentials down on the floor at the convention in 2016. Oh, well, we can't vote for this guy, and now they all support him. You had, uh, prominent conservative pundits saying we need to invoke the 25th Amendment to get rid of Trump, and so I don't know if this is a boy who cried wolf situation or what, but there's just this uncanny quality where we've kind of heard it all before,
Mhm.
and none of it actually came about last time. It was just you know filling up column inches.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the real complicity is between this keeping the media machine going and the political machine going at the same time. I mean, you said you, as an American citizen, would prefer it if you had a president who was compos mentis, and I think probably the rest of the world too would also like America to have someone in charge of the nuclear codes who is, you know, um, uh, in his right mind. I mean, personally, I have to say I find it difficult to watch any of the debate, but out of just this terrible sense of pity for the humanity of this man. But perhaps that's too sentimental, and after all, politics is a vicious game. Um, so, I mean, Europe is currently somewhat on tenterhooks with the various elections going on. Lots of concern about swings to the far right, so called. Supposedly, we already discussed the misuse of this term when it came to the recent European elections. There isn't really anything to discuss at the moment in relation to France and the UK, other than, as I noted, the Marine Le Pen's party doing relatively well. Certainly better than Macron, but we know often in the second round of the French election that people swing back to what they think is, let's say, a more certain vote. So we'll see what happens in a few days' time. UK election, obviously on Thursday. Results will be available early Friday morning. It looks like the Tories are heading for some kind of wipeout. May not be total. We may get a second party in the near future. Certainly, Farage is doing his best to talk about immigration. We've already kind of discussed that. So the other topic really is Pride Month. And we've just come to the end of another Pride Month. There is only 1 month a year, allegedly. Sometimes it feels like every day is Pride Day, but no, there's a month dedicated to this most virtuous of sins. Um, Pride is a lot less popular this year, perhaps in the wake of the Bud Light debacle last year. People will remember the kind of use of this sort of transvestite as their sort of icon, and this led to a kind of widespread boycott of Bud Light and loss of share value for the parent company. Obviously, we've covered many of the more contentious and difficult aspects of things like gender identity. We've tried to track the history of this. We've been very critical of the medicalization of children and others, and indeed the entire paradigm that has permitted this deeply false idea to come about, and the punishment of people who've dared to question it. So what do you guys think is going on with this, both lack of corporate support and a massive diminution in seeming public support? We had a great piece by Patrick Deneen recently, who was situating the Ten Commandments discussion in Alabama in the context of a kind of rainbow liturgy. We've seen the rainbow flag or the progress flag and these kind of sentiments really spread through institutions like wildfire, schools being taught to children and so on, many problems with that. Do we think that perhaps the public demonstration of commitment to pride is no longer necessary because those ideas have infected the institutions, or is there a general turning back, maybe related to the kind of turning to conservative and more right wing parties in Europe? That kind of populism. What do you guys think is going on here?
I think there are two basic ways to view the genuinely quieter pride we've seen uh, in June 2024. One is a minimizing reading saying, look, basically, because it's one, it has lost its salience as a culture war symbol, and thus there's no real purpose in flying what was always a battle flag. Sort of, you're no longer at war, so you can take the banner down. Another minimizing reading is, well, this is about keeping the horses calm, avoiding a big conservative backlash as the Democrats try to get Biden over the finish line. But if Trump were in the White House now, or if he returns, everything will be dialed back up to 11. Or even once, if Biden is put back in the White House or someone else, then you'll see a return of pride marketing. Uh, I think we're seeing something a little more significant. After decades of increasing buy in, pride appears to be losing public legitimacy. And that change is reflected in a few things: a corporate retreat from pride themed marketing, shifts in public opinion, and conflicts among progressive groups about the meaning of pride. Uh, Nina, you mentioned the retreat in corporate marketing. As you said, it all begins in 2023 with a backlash to Bud Light. Bud Light sales declined by 25% after the Dylan Mulvaney promotion. Uh, two of its executives were put on leave. Its chief marketing officer stepped aside. After 22 years as the leading beer in America, uh, its sales were exceeded by those of Modelo Especial. Target similarly saw a backlash. Uh, After uh, sorry, Stephen, I have some stuff here I'm consulting. Um, the backlash to Target occurred after social media accounts claimed that a size extra small swimsuit advertised as having light binding in the chest and a tuck friendly crotch was available for purchase in the children's section at a Target. Target officials responded that the suits were offered only in adult sizing and not intended for children, but sales fell by 5%. And Target this year uh, offered no pride themed merchandise of any kind for children. not just no stuff with Tuck or anything, but no Pride merchandise of any kind, which they had done in the past. They removed all Pride merchandise from half their stores. Bud Light made no reference to Pride in its marketing this year. Neither did Nike, which had offered Pride themed collections since 1999. So a big retreat there. Public opinion polling, as the political scientist Ryan Burge has noted, after decades of rapidly increasing support for same sex marriage, uh, support has leveled off, if not slightly declined. Uh, in 1996, Gallup found that 27% of Americans supported same sex marriage. By 2022, it was 71%. But in the most recent poll, it was down to 69%. So you know, there may be no real decline, but that arrow is no longer pointing upward. Now, we do see a decline elsewhere. There was a poll done by the American Enterprise Institute of Gen Z Americans, and it found that 80% of Gen Z adults favored same sex marriage. In 2023, that figure had fallen to 69%. That's a huge fall in support for same sex marriage among Gen Z Americans 18 and older. The reasons for that fall aren't clear. It might have to do with a rightward turn among Gen Z men who also tend to be very hostile to feminism. They're much more anti feminist than their millennial counterparts. Uh, Sohrab and I are part of uh, the greatest generation of male allies that the West has ever seen and maybe will ever see, if Gen Z is any indication. Uh, and then, in terms of the kind of contested meaning of pride, I was struck by a recent report in the New Yorker about John Fetterman, who, as lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, hung, trans flag, pride flag from his balcony at the state house, uh, and has long been a loud supporter of LGBT causes. He and his wife decided that they wouldn't attend the Pride Parade this year, which they have long done and publicly celebrated, basically because they feared protests from Palestinian groups. And or fear may be the wrong term, but they expected protests from Palestinian groups that would create an undue disruption. And I think that just goes to show the contested meaning of pride. There's long been now there's a very prominent accusation that invocations of pride are serving to pinkwash various causes. So it's increasingly prominent. You'll see on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, if a brand does a pride themed promotion, as say UGG Boots did with a queer influencer, the queer influencer on his Instagram page got all of this pushback because people are saying, "Well, UGG Boots is a Zionist entity. This is just pinkwashing. We can't have that." And so, pride is becoming more internally uh, divisive, as well as really people contest over its meaning. Um, so, I think that that's just one more thing that is kind of slowing the progress of pride. Uh, and then let me add one more. Then I'll end my speech. I promise. But Pride was the signal celebration of America's uh, urban centers, which were revived in the 1990s when we saw big drops in crime. It was really the big festival of the Bloomberg era New York that I moved into. Corporations, police coming together with left wing activist groups and all celebrating not just LGBT causes, but basically the ethos of the urban professional class more generally. Um, well, cities are in decline right now. These urban centers are in decline. Their model of governance isn't working as well as it used to. And as that happens, that's going to put a certain brake on pride. The city of Chicago, you know, significantly cut the number of entries in its Pride March this year and significantly shortened its route, not because of some ideological resistance to pride or effort to suppress it, as say in Alabama, where they say you can't have an abortion clinic unless the hallway is 20 feet wide. Right? It wasn't a regulation designed to suppress the act. It's just that they've had huge losses in the police force. the wake of 2020, a lot of police have left. Also, crime has gone up, and they're stretched very thin, and so they can't afford to have the same huge events. And here in New York, we saw in Washington Square Park a great amount of disorder at the end of the Pride Parade. Yeah, just as America's kind of hip urban cores, however well they do, that's going to end up affecting the prospects of Pride.
I don't have much to add. I basically ditto all of Matthew's observations. I will just say that by the time you read this, we will have published a piece by Carmel Richardson, who's one of the most capable people on the right who does reporting. Unfortunately, the right has far too many would-be Ben Shapiro's and not enough like would-be, Jeff Goldberg's or what have you, as I always say. But Carmel is one of those people who goes out and picks up the phone and goes places, and the results are formidable. In the past, she's written for us um, on surrogacy at compactmag.com, and on attacks on abortion clinics versus attacks on pro-life centers, and why the FBI ferociously prosecutes one set of crimes but not the other. So what she's writing about us at this time is just the kind of market segmentation that is emerging among corporations, that some are becoming less responsive to campaigns like the human rights campaigns, corporate equity index, where they rate you on how pro-LGBT you are, because they're realizing at least some brands that market themselves to rural Americans or more traditional minded Americans, families, and so on, they're like, hey, like our consumers don't like this. And they're at some point, it seems like the market mechanism of, declining profits, it has some marginal effect on the thinking of executives, given a certain industry, not all industries. But the point that she makes is that this is that pride, especially corporate pride, is not at all something organic. It's not like all these executives were just suddenly spontaneously decided to go all in on this stuff. It's a result of a very effective, or at least until recently effective, kind of activist mechanism backed up by a great deal of media, NGO, et cetera, power. And so that just means that things get rolled back. I do just want to ditto the point that both of you have made. Same for me here. I mean, I just see less of the Pride Progress flag. I happen to be in Florida for the summers, but it, I'm in a place where it's half Democratic Republican. Like the suburb where I live is exactly 50-50. It's not like a bastion of red Florida, and yet it's just nowhere, none. Um, I was in Palm Beach, which is very kind of this she vacation spot for the wealthy. That is not where we live, by the way. And nothing, not a single sign of it anywhere. And that's upscale. That's really